Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second broadcast of our first ever webinar. I'd like to start off by saying thank you for taking the time to tune in. We are Horizon View Technologies, and we've spent the last 2 years working on perfecting the way operations and management are able to monitor and maintain their solar sites. To start off, I'm Jiachen, my colleagues call me Jay, and I'm in charge of all the operations regarding product development. I started off as a software developer here at Horizon View, but now I'm responsible for streamlining the full process for Horizon View, which includes flying the sites to all the way to delivering the data in a easy to understand and digestible way. This webinar will be your opportunity to get to know who we are and what we can do for you. And along the way, I hope you guys learn something new. So to start off, I'd like to cover some ground on what's going on in the solar industry. We've already come to the point where solar energy is pretty ubiquitous when talking about clean energy or replacing fossil fuels. Solar is probably the first thing to come to mind. And now more than ever, the demand for energy has grown faster than the supply can meet. For example, because of the rise of the AI industry, there's an increase in demand for energy from the data centers that have just suddenly been built. And these new developments draw a lot of energy. I'm talking about megawatts, if not gigawatts of energy. Realistically, only solar can match this fast development of say these data centers, given that solar is able to provide clean and cheap energy while also being able to scale at a similar rate as these new developments. But like any other kind of power plant, solar arrays also require maintenance and inspections throughout the lifespan of the arrays and the panels and equipment within them. And so the global PV industry already utilizes various kinds of inspections, including aerial inspections for arrays throughout the array's cycle. Annual inspections are performed in order to provide accurate repair data for things like maintenance and warranty claims. And since demand for this clean energy is so high, there really is an urgency to detect, identify, and quantify these defects in the array to fix these issues as fast as possible. If a site isn't providing max potential energy, essentially that space is wasted. And also, besides meeting the demand for the energy, issues like fire hazards can arise. So it's very important to keep these sites well inspected and up to date. So to specify a little bit more on who we are, what do we do at Horizon View Technologies? Typically, the elevator pitch I give is that we fly planes over solar sites and figure out what's going on with them. But I understand that's pretty vague and that doesn't cover very much. So what exactly does this mean? To specify a little bit more, what we do is we fly fixed-wing manned aircraft equipped with high-resolution digital and thermal cameras that gather detailed image data. Then our machine learning tools can utilize this data to perform an analysis on the status of the solar array. On top of that, we use precision GPS to geotag these images in order to provide an accurate and up-to-date survey of these solar sites. So the in-depth data that we collect allows us to see what's an affected panel versus a fully functioning one based off of thermal readouts. Now, we developed a computer vision analysis tool in order to efficiently analyze these large sites. What that essentially means is that we are able to automate a good amount of analyzing the site instead of having someone sit there and look row by row, column by column, panel by panel on what's going on with the site. Because sometimes there's hundreds of thousands of panels, and that's just not sustainable. So we're very thankful that we've developed such a tool to really efficiently analyze these sites. Once the site is analyzed, we're able to provide this data in an easy to digestible in-house built dashboard, which I'll be able to show you guys later. Everything in our company is vertically integrated, so we're thankful to not be too dependent on third parties to execute our job. This allows us to have a really quick turnaround time and overall differentiates us from the crowd when it comes to providing a deliverable. So let's dive in a little bit on thermography and the hows and whys a little bit. Traditionally sites are inspected by hand and by people on the ground. Either visually inspecting the actual equipment or doing something like IV curve tracing, and this is a pretty good technique. I'm not saying that it's a flawed way to analyze a site, but I would say that the downside is it is pretty time consuming. When it comes to on the ground visual inspections, that can take as long as like 10 hours per megawatt. And even as something as like efficient as PV tracing, that's still taking about 4 to 5 hours per megawatt. Now that doesn't sound too bad for say a smaller site, let's say for example, a 3 megawatt job. The whole thing can be inspected in about 2 to 3 days with like as like a rough turnaround, but you still have to, do the inspection and then provide some kind of deliverable. And since it's so time consuming, usually that deliverable is just, some PDF or a printout and not something a little more like in depth. So, and then on top of that, the issue is that you still are sending someone on site. These sites are out, in the sun, doing their job, but it's hot out there. It's a hazard. Some of these places are like, hazardous terrain. They're really remote, and you're just subjecting a technician to just be out there. And I'll be honest, I personally wouldn't want to be out there. So then how is thermography a better option? As you can see here, we do have some like image examples, but to break down what's going on, the entire role of a solar panel is to convert light into electricity. So a functional panel can do this, and thus like the reflected heat on the panel is much less than say the ground. But when you have a panel in the sun that isn't functioning right, that energy is going straight to heat, much like the ground. And so sometimes, you have things where it's like not even just the panel is malfunctioning. The panel could be a fully functioning panel, but you have issues like combiner issues or inverter issues where that sunlight is still not being converted into energy that can be delivered onto the grid, and thus like the panels still show heat signatures. So like from these images that you can see here, it's pretty clear when a panel is having issues based on just the heat that it's emitted. And if I understand that there are issues on panels that may not be based on heat, and that's why we still use high resolution RGB cameras. That way we can detect things like shading issues or like glass cracks. So from what I just explained, it's pretty clear that thermography is a more ideal solution than your traditional boots on the ground approach. Thermography allows for even early detection of an issue, so that way like any problematic equipment doesn't spread or escalate to a greater problem on the grid. And then personally, coming from the software side of things, it's pretty exciting to see that solar arrays don't need to really sink costs into like say like on-site monitoring equipment, since we're able to like actually like visualize these issues and accelerate the process with machine learning tools. Besides that, since we are doing aerial imagery of a site throughout its lifespan, we're also able to utilize this data to see any patterns that may arise, possibly due to weather or terrain, or maybe just the type of equipment, say like brand. Lastly, one of the most important benefits of like aerial thermography is cost, since what we do eliminates a lot of the logistical challenges of inspecting an array, on top of being able to complete these inspections in like a fraction of the time. Time and money aren't being wasted on just getting someone out there and and just trying to execute all the logistics of just inspecting the site. So as easy as I've made it sound, perfecting this process has been quite the journey. We've been able to tackle a lot of the logistics issues of aerial imagery, as well as hone in like things like flight techniques. That way we make sure that we are able to utilize our time as efficiently as possible. That means like not missing the mark when we do fly over a site, and just making sure that our images are coming out as as crisp and high res as possible. Having a machine learning tool again is like developing a machine learning tool in-house wasn't easy, but thankfully over time we've been able to grow like a repository of data. That way we can train the tool to be more and more accurate over time, and that also allows us not to really depend on like cloud hosted data. So now I think I've covered enough about why aerial thermography and imaging is kind of the future of inspecting these arrays. Let's talk about the execution of the actual task. A common question that we get is, why not drones? Like planes do seem they are bigger vehicles and may seem like a lot harder to deal with, but the truth is that we're not entirely like denying the solution of using drones. In fact, we're pretty open-minded on finding the opportunity to use drones. But in our experience, we've had a lot more success using fixed-wing manned aircraft. Planes have the advantage of speed, And since our equipment is extremely capable, the speed doesn't really affect the quality of the image. This, of course, allows us to capture the site quicker, but also allows us to capture consistent temperature readings. Now, what do I mean by consistent temperature readings? Drones are great. I think that drones play a huge role in the future of our technology. But when a drone flies a site, it takes maybe 20 to 30 minutes per megawatt. Whereas when we survey a site, we can do it as quick as, say, 10 to 15 minutes per megawatt, which cuts down half of the time. That's fine. Drones are capable of completing like a 1 to 2 megawatt site, and the drone operator is able to finish in a day with everything. But when you're dealing with, say, a site that has tens of megawatts, if not hundreds of megawatts, the days will pass. This is a job that becomes, instead of hours, can become days. And as the day goes on, the sun and the weather, it gets warmer and cooler, and that means that panel thermal readouts will vary. Say on one side of the site it'll be a lot cooler or warmer than another side of the site, and that can cause things like false positives, given that you have different temperature deltas. On top of that, the advantage is just that once again, we don't have someone on site, on the ground, having to deal with the terrain and the weather when it comes to inspecting the site. We're able to just fly over the site, collect our data without being intrusive to the site at all. And then lastly, drones have a limited range and typically need on-site charging and piloting. And so you can send a drone out, it covers some of the site, but it has to come back, whereas we're able to cover the entire site in a single trip. I wouldn't say in one go, but yeah, in a single trip. So with that covered, I just kind of want to go through with the deliverable dashboard. So what we can see here is our dashboard here, which we call Insight. So I have this example site right here, and this is what you'll typically see when you click onto a site. This is your at a glance breakdown on the data. You can see that there is a analysis date. This is the date where we fly over the site, so that way the most recent date of inspection. You have some data visualizations like a pie chart, as well as this block data table right here. For this site, for example, there are 15 individual blocks onto the site, and based off of the color of the circles, you can see that, say, block 3 has a few more issues than, say, blocks 1 and 2. And if circles aren't really your thing, you're able to change it into just a broken down table like this. Just to preface, every table on this platform is exportable to your desired format. So say, for example, you want to export this block data into a CSV, you just click on the download button here. You can change the name, and then you can even change it to an SQL file as well as a JSON. So moving on to our platform, we also have a map overview. If you don't want to just look at colors, shapes, and tables, we also have this digital map here, where the site is represented on a digital version. Whereas you can see there are some polygons here. These are just rectangles, and each rectangle represents each individual panel on the site. Now, you may have already noticed that some of the rectangles are gray and some of the rectangles are colored in. The color's based on the severity of the fault, and the gray rectangles are just basically functioning panels. So you can click on each individual rectangle here. So let's say if I click on this one, that's gray. You'll see that this pop-up window just basically says panel in working order, but it also gives you GPS coordinates on where it's located, and as well as grid locations. So that means what block, what row, what column. So now if I click on, say, a panel that has an issue, I click on this yellow one here, you'll see that the pop-up is yellow. It gives you a fault level as well as a fault category, and then same thing, panel location as well as grid location. You may have already noticed that there is a button right here that says add to repair list. What that basically means is, seeing your site is great, but you want to have something actionable. So what you'll do here is you can select a repair date. We'll say add a new date, and so today's the 2nd. Let's say I want to do it 1 week out, so I'll do the 9th. So I'll add the date here, and that's your selected date here, and then you'll be able to click on any fault and just add that to the repair list. Pretty simple. Now, I know that there's a lot of panels, and say, for example, this site, there's a lot of faults. You can't just click on each individual panel and say like, oh, like you're going to spend hours clicking on each individual panel basically. So what you can do is select panels within an area. So if I click this button here and click on just an area of the map, let's say I draw this rectangle out here, this is a rough shape that I hand drew, but you can see that all these panels here are in this area, and I'll just say confirm, and then it'll go ahead and add each individual panel. Now, you may be concerned that saying, oh, I don't want to add, functioning panels to this repair list. Don't worry. It only selects the panels that have faults, given that those are the only ones you need to take a look at. Now, if I move to the list itself, I can click on View List, and that's everything I just added to the list. And of course, you can remove anything if you'd like. And once you're done with building your list, you just click on Export, and you go ahead and just download the CSV to work on it from there. Now, digital polygons are great. Like I'm sure that say you're someone that manages a site, you would you already know what's going on, but how do you verify how do you verify that the panels are actually non-functional? So we're able to actually provide a site overlay of the actual images. If you click on the overlay right here, let's say infrared, and I'll just lower the opacity here of the grid, you'll see the actual images that were taken on, say, that inspection date. So you'll have these issues right here, as you remember. For this example, it would be shading issues, and you can see that there are some kind of vegetation shading or something like that. But let's say if you want to see hotspots, you literally can see the panel has hotspots in this general area. So that generally wraps up our platform. We do have other features as well, such as data tables that can be exported based off of faults and revenue affected. But that essentially wraps up our platform here. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to really watch our webinar. We will be out in Las Vegas next week for RE+. Please come visit if you are going to RE+. We'll be at booth V2036. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you guys may have. Don't worry, guys, I don't bite, so don't be shy. I'll be happy to answer anything that you may have. Alrighty, I'm looking at the chat. Looks like there's no more questions. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to